The air in Lancaster City was thick with an oppressive heat, a smothering blanket that clung to every surface and seeped into every pore. Nightfall brought little respite, the humidity persisting like an unwelcome specter. Johnny Vanjik lay in his small, cluttered apartment, staring at the ceiling fan as it wobbled and creaked, a rhythmic reminder of the passage of time. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more unsettling than the last. Sleep was an elusive dream, constantly slipping through his grasp. In the neon-lit streets below, the city's pulse was as vibrant and chaotic as ever. People moved in and out of shadows, their faces masks of indifference or despair. It was a city that thrived on its own darkness, a place where the line between survival and sin was often blurred. Johnny knew this all too well. He was a product of these streets, a bleeder in a world that fed on pain and suffering. He rose from his bed, the worn springs protesting beneath his weight. The mirror in the corner of the room reflected a gaunt, weary figure, eyes sunken and haunted. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, the motion more habit than necessity. The night called to him, a siren song he could never resist. Johnny's apartment was a testament to his fractured state of mind. Old newspapers and magazines were strewn across the floor, mingling with discarded clothes and empty bottles. On a small table by the window, a collection of razors lay neatly arranged, their gleaming blades a stark contrast to the surrounding squalor. He picked one up, feeling the familiar weight in his hand, and slipped it into his pocket. It was his talisman, a reminder of the thin line he walked every day. As he stepped into the night, the city embraced him with its cacophony of sounds and sights. He navigated the labyrinthine alleys with ease, each twist and turn as familiar as the back of his hand. The faces he passed were ghosts, fleeting and forgettable, their eyes glazed with the same desperation that gnawed at his soul. At the heart of the city lay a club, a den of iniquity that catered to the darkest desires of its patrons. It was a place where anonymity was guaranteed, where masks were both literal and figurative. Johnny slipped inside, the heavy bass of the music vibrating through his bones. The air was thick with smoke and sweat, the mingling sense of alcohol and despair creating a heady concoction. He moved through the crowd, a shadow among shadows, until he reached a dimly lit corner. Here, he found them, the beautiful friends who thrived in the light of fame. They were draped in opulence, their clothes a kaleidoscope of colors and textures, their laughter a brittle, hollow sound. They greeted him with open arms, their smiles wide and insincere. "Johnny, darling," cooed one of them, a woman with porcelain skin and blood-red lips. "We've missed you. It's not a party without our favorite bleeder." He forced a smile, the effort draining what little energy he had left. "I'm here now," he replied, his voice barely audible over the din. They surrounded him, their hands caressing and grasping, their eyes hungry for the spectacle they knew would come. It was a game they played, a twisted dance of manipulation and cruelty. They wanted him to bleed for them, to entertain them with his pain. He felt the razor in his pocket, its cold metal a reminder of his purpose. He was a pawn in their game, but tonight he would turn the tables. As they pressed closer, he drew the blade, the motion swift and practiced. The first cut was shallow, a thin line of crimson that blossomed on his arm. Gasps of delight rippled through the crowd, their eyes wide with anticipation. He didn't stop. Each slash was a rebellion, a declaration of his own agency. The pain was a distant echo, drowned out by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The beautiful friends recoiled, their laughter dying on their lips as they realized the spectacle was not for their amusement but for his salvation. Johnny's vision blurred, the edges of his world fraying and unraveling. He swung the razor wide, the blade catching the light as it arced through the air. Blood sprayed in vivid arcs, a macabre testament to his defiance. The crowd scattered, their faces masks of horror and disbelief. In the chaos, Johnny felt a strange sense of peace. He was no longer their pawn, no longer a bleeder at their beck and call. He was a force of nature, a harbinger of his own destiny. As his strength waned, he fell to his knees, the razor slipping from his grasp. The world around him dimmed, the sounds fading into a distant hum. He lay on the cold, hard floor, his breath shallow and ragged. The beautiful friends were gone, their departure as swift and callous as their arrival. In the silence, he found a strange solace. He had bled for them, but in the end, he had done it on his own terms. As the darkness closed in, he thought of the fire that burned within him, the relentless inferno that drove him to the brink. It was a fire that would never be extinguished, a beacon of his own defiance. In that final moment, he was free. The city continued its relentless march, indifferent to the struggles of those who walked its streets. It was a place devoid of light, a pit where demons roamed freely. But for Johnny Vanjik, it was home. And in its embrace, he found his own twisted salvation. In the dim light of his apartment, Johnny sat by the window, his arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage. The aftermath of his defiance left him drained but resolute. He looked at the scattered razors on the table, their sharp edges gleaming under the flickering bulb. They were his friends, his only companions in this relentless struggle. These are my friends. See how they glisten. See this one shine. How he smiles in the light. My friend. My faithful friend. Johnny picked up a razor, turning it over in his hand. The weight of it was comforting, familiar. He whispered to it, his voice barely a murmur in the quiet room. Speak to me, friend. Whisper, I'll listen. I know you've been locked out of sight. All these years, like me, my friend. Well, I've come home to find you waiting. Home. And we're together. And we'll do wonders. Won't we? The razor seemed to hum in response, a silent agreement to his unspoken pact. Johnny held it closer, feeling its cold steel against his skin. It was more than a tool, it was an extension of himself, a part of his being that understood his pain and his need for release. You there, my friend? Come, let me hold you. Now, with a sigh. You're warm in my hand. My friend. My clever friend. He traced the blade along his arm, not pressing hard enough to break the skin, just enough to feel its presence. It was a ritual, a moment of connection that brought him a semblance of peace. The razors were more than just objects, they were his confidants, his faithful allies in the war against his inner demons. Rest now, my friends. Soon, I'll unfold you. Soon you'll know splendors you never have dreamed all your days. My lucky friends. Till now your shine was merely silver. Friends, you shall drip rubies. You'll soon drip precious rubies. He placed the razor back on the table, its blade glistening with the promise of future acts. Johnny's mind drifted to the faces of those who had driven him to the brink, the beautiful friends who thrived on his suffering. They would not see him broken, he would rise again, stronger and more resolute than ever. At last, my right arm is complete again. Johnny rose from his seat, his resolve hardened by the fire that burned within. The night outside was dark and foreboding, but it held no power over him. He was a bleeder, a survivor in a world that sought to consume him. And in his defiance, he found strength. The city awaited him, its neon-lit streets a labyrinth of possibilities. Johnny stepped out into the night, his mind sharp and clear. He would reclaim his place in this twisted world, one cut at a time. The razors were his allies, his friends in the battle that lay ahead. As he walked through the shadows, Johnny felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pain, the blood, the endless nights, they were all part of his journey, a testament to his resilience. He was more than a pawn, he was a force to be reckoned with, a bleeder who would carve his own destiny. And so, with the razors at his side, Johnny Vanjik embraced the darkness, ready to face whatever horrors awaited him. In the heart of Lancaster City, a new chapter began, one written in blood and defiance. The city may have been a pit of despair, but for Johnny, it was also a crucible of strength and survival. And in that crucible, he would forge his own path, one razor's edge at a time. Johnny Vanjik walked with a renewed sense of purpose, his footsteps echoing through the empty streets of Lancaster City. The neon lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, painting the urban landscape with a spectral glow. He felt the weight of his razors in his pockets, their presence a constant reminder of his resolve. The city was a grim theater, and he was both the actor and the avenger, ready to reclaim his narrative from those who had wronged him. The night was still young, and the air buzzed with the energy of those seeking their own escapes. Johnny found himself drawn to an old, forgotten building nestled in a dark alley, a place he had stumbled upon years ago. The sign above the door was barely legible, its letters faded and worn, the razor's edge. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. The room was dimly lit, the flickering light bulb casting long shadows on the cracked walls. A dilapidated barber's chair sat in the center, surrounded by an assortment of rusty tools and broken mirrors. It was a relic of a bygone era, a forgotten sanctuary where he could plan his vengeance. He moved to the chair, running his fingers along its worn leather surface. This would be his new domain, a place where he could exact his retribution on those who had treated him as nothing more than a plaything for their amusement. The razors in his pockets seemed to hum with anticipation, eager to taste blood once more. Johnny began to clean the space, methodically sweeping away the dust and cobwebs. Each movement was deliberate, his mind focused on the task at hand. He polished the razors until they gleamed, their sharp edges reflecting the dim light. As he worked, he hummed a tune, a haunting melody that echoed through the empty room. In the coming days, whispers began to spread through the underbelly of Lancaster City. A new barber had taken up residence in the razor's edge, offering his services to those brave enough to seek him out. The beautiful friends who once mocked and tormented Johnny were intrigued, their curiosity piqued by the tales of a masterful barber with a dark and mysterious past. One by one, they came to him, drawn by the promise of unparalleled skill and the allure of the unknown. Johnny greeted each of them with a cold, calculated smile, his eyes betraying nothing of the storm that raged within. He led them to the chair, his hands steady and precise as he prepared his tools. As the razors danced across their skin, Johnny whispered to them, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. He spoke of their sins, their cruelty, and their indifference, each word a dagger that cut deeper than any blade. They were entranced, unable to move or speak, as if under a spell. And then, with a swift, practiced motion, he delivered his final stroke. The razors sliced through flesh and sinew, their keen edges leaving behind trails of crimson. The beautiful friends were no longer laughing, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. They bled for him now, their lifeblood staining the floor of his sanctuary. Johnny watched as the life drained from their bodies, his expression one of grim satisfaction. They had taken everything from him, but in this moment, he reclaimed his power. The razors gleamed in the dim light, their thirst for vengeance sated, if only for a time. He disposed of the bodies with meticulous care, ensuring that no trace of his deeds remained. The city would not miss these souls, lost as they were in their own decadence and depravity. Johnny knew that his work was far from over, there were still many who deserved his wrath. Word of the mysterious barber continued to spread, his legend growing with each passing day. Those who sought him out did so at their own peril, lured by the promise of perfection but unaware of the price they would pay. Johnny's name became synonymous with fear, a specter that haunted the darkest corners of Lancaster City. As he sat in his chair, the razors by his side, Johnny felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was no longer a pawn in their game, he was the master of his own fate. The city was his stage, and he would play his part to the end. Each night, as he prepared for his next client, he whispered to his razors, his faithful friends. They glistened in the dim light, their edges sharp and ready. These are my friends. See how they glisten. See this one shine. How he smiles in the light. My friend. My faithful friend. And with each cut, each drop of blood that stained the floor, Johnny Vanjik's legend grew. He was the demon barber of Lancaster City, a harbinger of vengeance in a world that had long since forgotten the meaning of justice. And in the darkness, he found his solace, his salvation, and his revenge. A pulse that beat in time with Johnny Vanjik's heart. The whispers of his deeds, the tales of his vengeance, had spread far and wide. The city's underbelly buzzed with fear and morbid fascination, each shadow a potential victim, each alley a potential stage for his dark performance. The razor's edge had transformed from a forgotten relic into a shrine of retribution. The once dilapidated barber's chair now gleamed, meticulously maintained, its leather supple and inviting. The walls, once cracked and peeling, were now adorned with the tools of his trade, razors of all shapes and sizes, each one polished to a deadly shine. He stood in the center of his domain, his faithful friends, his razors arrayed around him. They were his confidants, his comrades in arms, each blade a testament to his resolve. He could feel their thirst for blood, their hunger for justice. To seek revenge, he whispered, the words reverberating through the room. In hell, we end. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the dim light. It was another of the beautiful friends, drawn by the whispers of Johnny's unparalleled skill. This one, a man with a finely tailored suit and an air of arrogant confidence, looked around with a sneer. So, you're the legendary barber everyone's been talking about, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. I've come to see if you're as good as they say. Johnny smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down the man's spine. Please, take a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair. I promise you won't be disappointed. The man hesitated for a moment, then shrugged off his jacket and settled into the chair. Johnny draped a cloth over him, his movements smooth and practiced. As he prepared his tools, he began to speak, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. Do you know why they come to me? He asked, running a razor lightly across the strop. They come seeking perfection, seeking to hide their sins behind a veneer of beauty. But they cannot hide from me. I see their darkness, their cruelty. The man shifted uncomfortably, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice wavering. Johnny leaned in close, his eyes boring into the man's soul. You think you're untouchable, that your wealth and status protect you. But in my chair, you're just another soul, another sinner. And tonight, you will pay for your sins. With a swift, practiced motion, Johnny drew the razor across the man's throat. The blade sang as it cut through flesh and sinew, a perfect, precise line. Blood spurted from the wound, staining the cloth and pooling on the floor. The man's eyes widened in shock and terror, his hands grasping at his throat in a futile attempt to stem the flow. Johnny watched impassively, his expression one of grim satisfaction. The razors hummed with approval, their thirst sated once more. As the life drained from the man's body, Johnny's thoughts turned inward. He had chosen this path, embraced the darkness within him, to seek revenge on those who had wronged him. Each cut, each drop of blood, was a step closer to his ultimate goal. In hell, we end, he repeated, his voice a whisper in the silence. But until then, we fight. The city continued its relentless march, indifferent to the carnage that unfolded in its shadows. But the legend of the demon barber of Lancaster City grew with each passing day. Johnny Vanjik was no longer just a man, he was a force of nature, a harbinger of retribution. His sanctuary, the razor's edge, became a place of fear and fascination, a dark beacon in a city of shadows. Those who sought him out did so at their own peril, drawn by the promise of perfection but unaware of the price they would pay. Johnny's razors gleamed in the dim light, their edges sharp and ready. Each night, as he prepared for his next client, he whispered to his faithful friends, his voice a low, haunting melody. These are my friends. See how they glisten. See this one shine. How he smiles in the light. My friend. My faithful friend. And with each cut, each drop of blood that stained the floor, Johnny Vanjik's legend grew. He was the demon barber of Lancaster City, a harbinger of vengeance in a world that had long since forgotten the meaning of justice. And in the darkness, he found his solace, his salvation, and his revenge. The city was his stage, and he played his part to the end. The beautiful friends who once mocked and tormented him were now the victims of his wrath. And as the whispers spread, as the fear grew, Johnny Vanjik stood resolute, his razors at the ready, his heart burning with the fire of retribution. To seek revenge. In hell, we end.